In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Blackbow build. This is a New Game Plus build that focuses exclusively on the use of a bow to take down enemies. This is something that I know people have been struggling to figure out how to do, and in this video I want to show you how it's perfectly viable to play using a bow in New Game Plus. The reason that I made this a New Game Plus build is it's sort of an evolution of the Bloody Bowman build in that it has similar stats, it uses similar equipment, but it's sort of taking the next steps in the process in order to make it viable into NG+, and by doing so, like, we've done things like increased our faith in order to use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength to further boost our attack power. And there are a number of things we've done here that you probably wouldn't have the attribute points for in New Game, or maybe very close to the end of the game. But once you get a New Game Plus, these things are almost a must in order to be competitive. So let's talk about the weapon we're using. We're using the Blackbow here. This is the same weapon we used in the Bloody Bowman build, and this is a really good bow. It has very good damage. It operates like a short bow, even though it's a long bow, meaning you can jump and shoot, roll and shoot, jump and shoot, and then shoot when you land. So it operates the way a short bow does, which is very, very important for this build because it's a very mobile build, and getting those shots off quickly as opposed to standing still pressing R1 are basically how you have to play a bow build in this game. And Barrage is absolutely fantastic at cranking out damage as well, particularly from any distance. Well, not super long range, but from medium to short range, you can crank out, even point blank, this thing can crank out a lot of damage. One of the problems with bow builds in Elden Ring is that bows in general have terrible scaling, meaning that they are much better earlier on in the game when scaling doesn't play a big role. The upgrade of the weapon plays a more important factor earlier on in the game, and scaling tends to come into effect later in the game. So when the scaling comes into effect with bows in the later half of the game and you're not getting very much damage out of it, you start to struggle to kill enemies. And we've basically resolved that issue by taking Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. These two spells are going to increase your physical damage to the point where, you know, you're actually doing enough damage to kill stuff reliably. It's still going to take you a couple arrows here and there, and it's not like you're going to one-shot everything. But it will make it so that you can reliably kill enemies, and when we combine that with the Blue Dancer Charm to get even more attack power, it works out really, really well. For your Sacred Seal, ideally you'd use one that weighs 0. We don't have enough faith here for the Erdtree Seal, so the ideal one would be like Frenzied Flame Seal, or any seal that weighs 0. I don't have one on this build. I didn't do that particular quest line on this build, so I don't have that. I'm using the Clawmark Seal, which weighs 1.5. But ideally you'd get one that weighs the least possible, which is 0, in order to get the most from the Blue Dancer Charm here, because that's going to lower your equip rate, and as your equip rate goes down, you gain more and more attack power from that talisman. What you want to use for armor is something extremely lightweight, because the Blue Dancer Charm has sort of soft cap breakpoints at 8, 16, 24, and then once you hit 30, you get no effect. That doesn't mean the damage difference from 8 to 8.1 is different. Like, you don't go from like 80 to 40 damage if you hit 8.1. It's sort of like a sliding scale. The more you get closer to 30, the less damage you deal. So it doesn't have to be exactly, you know, on the nose on these things. But my advice is don't go much heavier than 16. If you go too much past 16, I don't feel like there's much benefit in using the Blue Dancer Charm. So you should either aim for about 16 weight or aim for about 8 weight. In order to get 8 weight, you basically can use the Blackbow, a talisman that, or a Sacred Seal that weighs nothing, and then your talisman. So you'd wear no armor and you'd hit, you know, right around that 8 point. Or you could throw on, you know, one piece of armor that weighs like 1 or something to get some armor if you just want to wear something so you're covered. But you want to be close to that 8 break point. I went for the 16 route because I wanted to wear some armor that, you know, looked decently. I didn't want to be naked my entire run. But I've sacrificed some damage for that. So just keep in mind that there's sort of a sliding scale from 0 all the way up to 30, and the closer you are to 0, the more damage you're going to deal. Other talismans we're using for this build are the Old Lord's Talisman. This increases the duration of your spells. This is going to be Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, and the reason for that is because it can take longer with bows to kill things, and you don't have to rebuff constantly in combat. Flame Grant Me Strength is not exactly the fastest cast, nor is Golden Vow. So this is going to give you time in your boss fights, a little extended time to fight things. You'll probably have to rebuff with Flame Grant Me Strength once in a boss fight. That's not usually too difficult to do, but if it's something you've got to do regularly and then rebuff with Golden Vow and then rebuff with it, you know, you're taking too long. So the Old Lord Talisman will make these more effective. You don't have a ton of FP with this build either because of the way the stat spread is. So this will sort of alleviate some of that by making these buffs last longer. We're also using the Arrow Sting Talisman to further increase the attack power of our arrows by 10%. And we have Shard of Alexander in order to increase the ability Barrage by 15%. You can swap out Shard of Alexander depending on what you're doing. Like you could put in Ritual Sword Talisman if you just want overall more damage for everything, including regular attacks. But keep in mind you'll have to keep your health at 100%, which can be kind of difficult to do with a bow build at sometimes. Or you can put on the Spear Talisman if you find that better. That's going to increase your damage if you hit enemies with arrows when they're like in their forward attack animation, which tends to happen a lot with this build because you tend to have to bait enemies into attacking you sometimes, particularly ones that have a shield, so you can get good damage out of that as well. And as I mentioned, we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. Golden Vow here is going to give you some defenses too, which is nice. And Flame Grant Me Strength is going to boost your attack power. With Old Lord's Talisman, this should last roughly around 40 seconds, which isn't going to last the whole length of a lot of difficult fights, but it should be like 3/4 of the length, or maybe half. So you'll probably have to rebuff with this once, but Golden Vow should get you all the way through the fight. So if you saw the Bloody Bowman build, you kind of know that the focus of that build was using things like bleeding arrows in order to help set hemorrhage on enemies that had large health pools. So you're plinking away at them with the arrows, but you're really getting these big chunks ripped off when they would, when you trigger hemorrhage. And that was kind of the way to sort of offset the low damage of the bow. But I wanted to showcase in this video, and I hope you've noticed, that I'm just using a lot of regular arrows in my boss fights and fighting, because you don't really need bleed arrows for this build. You can use bleed arrows, obviously, and there are scenarios where that'll make things easier. But I wanted to showcase you don't have to have bleed arrows for this build, and that you can use regular trash arrows and still be effective. The bonus with Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength really increases the damage of this build with Blue Dancer Charm to the point that just hitting repeatedly, you'll eventually kill targets. Now, you obviously have to have a lot of arrows in order to play a bow build, and probably the most frustrating part of playing a bow build is managing your arrows. So that's still a thing in this build. But because you can use trash arrows so often, it's going to make it a lot easier to manage because you can just go buy them in bulk, and you'll have plenty of, runes in New Game Plus in order to do that right away. I do want to mention, though, that there are a couple good things to do before you go to New Game Plus if you're going to play a bow build. And that's go buy as many of all the different arrow types as you can. Like you can buy magic arrows and holy arrows and fire arrows, etc., and stockpile a whole bunch of those. That way they'll hold you over until you reach those vendors again in New Game Plus. There are enemies in the game that are just weak to certain damage types like fire. Crucible Knight doesn't have much resistance against fire, so that's a really good type against him. And again, there are other enemies that are weak to certain types. Some are just weak to pierce damage, which works out really well, like Godric. But this will allow you to use some of those arrows as you make your way through the game and to those vendors, and they generally deal more damage than the regular arrows. So don't use them like all the time, but definitely use them when you need them. Another couple things you should do before you go to New Game Plus is make sure that you've defeated the Bell-Bearing Hunter at least once, turned in his bell in Round Table Hold, and bought a bunch of thin bones. This will prevent you from having to go farm animals for bones. You can just stock up on them, a whole ton of them. And that way you can craft whatever arrows you need during New Game Plus without having to farm animals. And then also, you can buy blood roses from the Imprisoned Merchant. The location of this is on the wiki. And you can just stock up on these, so you don't have to farm these either. So if you want to make blood arrows, you have the bones and you have the blood roses. And so you're just good on those. If you need to farm flight pinions, if you want to make feathered arrows, which I do recommend doing, you'll have to spend a good amount of time farming those. To my knowledge, there's no way to buy those in bulk. So if you want to farm those, make sure you farm those. I mean, you can farm them in New Game Plus if you want, but you'll have to farm a bunch of those. That will give you like the tools that you need when you get to New Game Plus, that you can go straight into New Game Plus and just start completing the content and not have to like farm arrows right away like you did at the beginning of the game if you were playing a bow build. When it comes to stats for this build, I have 50 Vigor, 18 Mind, 25 Endurance, 45 Strength, 45 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 25 Faith, and 9 Arcane. You don't need any Intelligence or Arcane for this build, so disregard those. Again, started as an Astrologer, same save, not applicable. If you're not playing an Astrologer, your stat spread will look much better than this. 50 Vigor is there to keep you alive. Because you're wearing almost no armor, you're going to need to take this up to 60 at some point throughout NG+, or you're going to get one shot by certain bosses. So make sure you get that up to 60 when you can. 18 Mind is actually a little lower than I want, so you're going to want to increase this probably up to 25 or so. Golden Vow takes up a lot of FP, and you need to keep that up kind of constantly with this build in order to keep your damage high. So managing that is really where your FP cost is coming from. You probably won't use Flame Grant Me Strength all the time, and Barrage uses almost no FP. So you probably want to get this up to 25. 30 would be better, but you can take it up to 25 and then, do other stats and come back to 30 later if you're fine. 25 endurance is probably right on the edge of what we want for this build. If you're using Barrage, you are just tearing through stamina. Getting up to 30 would probably be better. You'll notice in the Gil fight in the footage that I actually run out of stamina, or I would have just killed him. You know what I mean? So having more stamina probably would have made that possible. So getting your endurance up to like 30, 35 at some point would be great. Strength and dexterity are your 2 damage dealing stats here, and we have them at 45 here, mostly to give me more points for other stuff. Usually I would kind of cut them off at 50. You can take these up to 50 if you want, but really you're not getting too much more damage out of this build. I mean, I would think at this point probably the last thing you want to do is increase strength and dexterity when you've got everything else where you want it, because it's such a minimal amount of damage that it increases per point that you're going to get more benefit out of like mind or endurance. So the last thing you want to do, you probably get mind up to 25, vigor up to 60, endurance up to like 30 or 35, and then you just crank dexterity and strength, as far out as you want to go in order to keep increasing your damage. We don't need to take faith any higher than 25 here because we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. That's all we want it for, so there's really no reason to increase faith. So all you really need to do is, get those things to where I said, and you're good to go. A couple of tips before I wrap up this video. If you're using the Flask of Wondrous Physique, I like to use the 2 stamina ones, the one that increases your stamina recovery and one that increases your stamina. Because in boss fights, you're usually using Barrage a lot. Getting that extra stamina can help alleviate, allow you to use Barrage continuously, and getting that stamina recovery will make your stamina come back faster, so this works really well. Adding dexterity or strength to get damage isn't a lot of damage. I find this is actually better use of those things. And additionally, if you're looking at what runes to use for this build, Radahn's is not a bad choice here. You really don't need too many more attribute points once you get to those break points that I mentioned, so it's not going to benefit you a ton. But Radahn gives you more FP, gives you more stamina and more health. All of those things are great for this build. You're going to use FP for Golden Vow and Barrage. Need extra health so you don't die, and then extra stamina for Barrage also. So that's a really good one for this build. Stay tuned for more build guides for Elden Ring, including New Game Plus builds, and we have more weapon guides coming. I see that people want a straight sword video. I know you guys have been wanting that for a while. That is a lot of swords to cover. I'll see if I can get that done next week. If not, it might be the very beginning of the following week. And again, I do read the comments. If you guys have builds you want to see, please let me know in the comments below.